Welcome to the Untold Tales audio anthologies. Written by Howard Loring and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. Clash of the Redheads, or Methodology and Firmly Fixed Jargon. The buckboard moved at a leisurely pace, with a slow but constant clipping of the horse's hooves reverberating off the narrow, cobblestoned street. About time, she thought, after finally noticing its creeping approach from around an adjacent corner. Naturally, she was relieved thereby, but concerned nevertheless. "Why so late?" asked the red-headed woman as she climbed aboard. "What's happened? Have the crates been delayed?" "No," answered the tall man holding the reins. "As was reported, they arrived this afternoon. The problem was elsewhere, I fear, something I missed. The good bishop's horse threw a shoe several miles out, and he had to lead it in on foot." The woman thought this over. Clearly, the unexpected development was not judged a setback to the mission at hand. In any event, it wasn't her call to make. "Well," she replied, "at least there's been time to unpack." They both laughed at this, each seeing the irony in the double meaning. The many accounts describing this day were of bones everywhere, spilling into the hallways from the overcrowded rooms. And also, their mission dealt directly with time itself. Washington City, the young nation's new capital, was small but growing. This engendered a ragged appearance with much construction everywhere in evidence. These seemingly haphazard endeavors now begat never-ending piles of building supplies amid giant mounds of excavated dirt, which quickly became a mucky runoff after the afternoon rainstorms so frequent this time of year. As well, being located in a drained swamp, the place was sticky with humidity and heavily infested with mosquitoes, leading to the beleaguered citizenry to appear haggard and unkempt. Yet despite these circumstances, various official structures were slowly being completed. The interminable, ever-pressing business of state plodded on, even among the surrounding chaos. The pair soon reached their destination, an isolated mansion atop a muddy rise that boldly stood among the rubble that was the growing capital. Due to the lateness of the hour, sentries bearing muskets stood guard on either side of the front door, which was open in hope of encouraging a draft. There was none. "May I help you?" asked a functionary who, having seen their approach, had walked out to meet the strangers now standing within the large columned portico. "Good evening, sir," replied the Redhead's companion. "We bear important dispatches for the president." Handing over 2 large envelopes, the taller visitor then added, "These sealed documents are our letters of introduction." The papers in question were faked, of course. The man, an official of some kind, looked to the first envelope and scrutinized its bold handwritten provenance. Then his eyebrows shot up. Next, without examining the second letter, he extended his arm, beckoning the pair inside. "Wait here, if you please," he instructed them, once the three had entered the grand foyer. "President Jefferson may wish to speak to you. I'll know in a moment." "We could just drop off our pouches," observed the redhead. The attendant, now overly gracious, slightly bowed. "That will be up to the president," he related. So it was, and sooner than the time travelers had expected, the man himself arrived by rushing down the carpeted hallway. His red hair was pulled into a tail by a large black ribbon, but he was in shirt sleeves without a frock coat or vest. He carried a now opened letter of introduction, waving it excitedly before him. "Are you really an anatomist?" he cried, while grasping the man's hand and shaking it vigorously. "You've studied under the great Monsieur Cuvier. You carry correspondence from my esteemed acquaintance in faraway France." "Oh, no, Mr. President," answered the stranger. "My name is Edward Patrick, and I'm a scientist trained under your good friend, the eminent Joseph Priestley. He died of late in Pennsylvania, at his home outside of Philadelphia." "Yes," admitted Jefferson, who was well aware of this sad occurrence. "A great loss, to be sure." The conspirator then indicated his companion, adding, "This is Ellis Alexander, and she bears your dispatches from France." "Indeed," replied the startled chief executive, now taking her hand. Alexander sounds Scottish, madame. Are you French? The woman playing her part laughed at the question. It's Miss Alexander, Mr. Jefferson, she coquettishly corrected the now embarrassed president. And I assure you that I'm very much an American. My uncle, who also lives in Philadelphia, is a naturalist, trained under the late John Clayton. He was an Englishman who moved to Virginia long before the war. Yes, Jefferson offered, now smiling. I know who he was. My uncle, she continued, frequently corresponds with the famous zoologist Joseph Banks, and through him with Monsieur Cuvier, as well as many other natural philosophers in Europe. These packets of personal letters and scientific papers were therefore sent to my uncle for safe transit, and I bear them now. Here, she indicated a carpet bag currently resting beside her. But this letter says that you are trained, observed Jefferson. True. I assist my uncle in his endeavors, she explained, helping with his specimens and correspondence and so forth. This naturally includes comparative anatomy, and I have become aware of much as a consequence. I enjoy it. Well, replied the now satisfied president, I'll trust you'll enjoy this visit too. And given the hour, you must both stay for dinner. I won't take no for an answer. He then led them down the hallway from whence he had come. While doing so, he opened the second sealed letter of introduction and quickly perused its contents. Soon enough, he stopped short, halting the time travelers that followed him. Ah, he said, you carried just what I've been awaiting, Edward. You bring me Dr. Priestley's last notes concerning the new state university to be built in nearby Charlottesville. He then added, I may call you Edward, may I not? I'm most honored, Mr. President, uttered the impostor, although the many documents he carried, as well as those borne by his cohort, were genuine enough. His friends, noted the redhead, call him Ward. Wonderful, stated Jefferson. Then I shall also. And as an intimate of the good Dr. Priestley, he should enjoy this evening as well, given Bishop Madison is here. This statement caused the taller man to laugh. But I'm no theologian, sir, he apologized. Joseph Priestley, as I'm sure you're aware, was a great scientist as well as a churchman. I assisted him in that vein only. Now the president laughed. All the better, he answered, grinning widely now. You'll see, the both of you will. Follow me to my office, if you please. Soon, the bones appeared. As stated in the record, they were everywhere, hundreds of them, placed on tables and desks, across chairs, or simply, as there was no more available space, dispersed upon the floor. Most of them were fairly large. Goodness me, gasped the red-headed woman, still acting. What's that? Said a gentleman standing in the corner of the chief executive's command center, as if trapped there by the sheer number of specimens. He was residing before an enormous crate filled with straw, the last of several lately sent by the now famous explorer, William Clark. The interrupted man had been shifting through the crate's inventory, a thick stack of parchments held in his hands. Aren't they magnificent? Gushed the president, while signifying the just liberated items. Then he added, Good news, Jamie. We have unexpected dinner guests, and luckily they are both trained in science. I believe some claret is in order. Introductions were quickly made. James Madison, the cousin to the well-known politician of the same name, was the current Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of Virginia, the first American-born cleric to hold that esteemed office. His bishopric being so close, he frequently visited the new federal city to confer on the president's current obsession, the proposed state university. Of course, as both families were neighbors, most of the Madisons were Jefferson's good friends, but this churchman was his oldest and dearest companion since childhood. These fossils arrived earlier today, the excited president explained, although the time travelers, being well briefed, already knew this. The Great Western Expedition is barely over, he next related to them, but I've sent poor Captain Clark off again, I fear. This time he's busy investigating Dr. Goforth's newly discovered site at the now legendary Big Bone Lick, which is located astride the broad banks of the Ohio River. The four now stood around Jefferson's desk, which held several curved pieces of skull, 2 different-sized tusks, and various sections of large jawbones. All of the relics were a deep tan color, even the ivory. Indeed, they were impressive. As the group sipped their claret, the bishop pointed to a tusk. "I've seen one of these at Monticello," he said to Jefferson. "You have several there, I believe. Is this not so, Tommy?" Then, after suddenly remembering the proper decorum, he injected with haste, "Mr. President, I meant to say." They all laughed at the comment, and Bishop Madison's old friend Tommy then proposed a toast. "To Captain Clark," he proclaimed. "Hear, hear," said the cleric, adding, "and to knowledge itself." "Yes, and to science," quickly followed the tall time traveler, whereupon all eyes then fell to the red-headed woman. Holding forth her glass, she boldly stated, "To discovery and the unending drive to undertake it." "To discovery," the men agreed. "And it's true. Bishop Madison is correct," the president then explained to the newcomers. "I do have several examples of a mammoth on display in the entryway at Monticello, but they are from an earlier expedition. These newer specimens were discovered only of late, uncovered in another part of the lick." "But, Mr. Jefferson," the woman noted, "I'm afraid these items are not artifacts of the woolly mammoth." This bold statement took the president aback. He'd been interested in such things since he was a boy. The new samples, he thought, were easily recognizable. Undaunted, she indicated a section of jawbone that was over a foot in length. It held a row of large serrated teeth, each one containing distinct, raised tricuspids. Taken together, they resembled a jagged ridge of mountainous peaks. "Mammoth teeth," she lectured, "are flatter, as the molars of a horse, only much larger. These come from another member of the elephant family, as the great Monsieur Cuvier has recently demonstrated. He has named them mastodons." "Oh dear," mumbled the bishop, who of course was fluent in Greek, and so was capable of translating the term. "Nipple tooth," she said, running her finger over the ridges. At first, Jefferson didn't respond. Soon, though, in spite of himself, the corrected president laughed aloud. Next, he blushed. Thankfully, at this point, dinner was announced. The group slowly filed into a dining room across the hall, after gingerly stepping over the numerous items placed about the floor. As was his custom among close friends, the president then served his guests himself, employing a nearby, fully stocked table. The meal was expertly prepared and included macaroni and cheese, a dish Jefferson savored. He'd discovered it years before when Congress had sent him to France after the Revolution. This fact was quite apropos, given the intrinsic and diverse nature of the new nation. Jefferson, after all, was the exact epitome of the well-educated and wealthy upper-class landed gentry, and as such, he had been chosen and then charged with an essential task deemed vital to the country's nascent future. Yet, from the very heart of France, this elegant man had retrieved for the American masses an imported Italian staple, tasty and cheaply made. It was then that he had met Georges Cuvier, the greatest naturalist alive. A zoologist by training, Cuvier's chief fame lay in his use of Linnaean principles to classify the animal kingdom. Living a generation earlier, the towering Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus had used his method mainly to catalog plants. As an inherent prerequisite, the now ennobled Baron Cuvier had been compelled to invent comparative anatomy in order to construct his new taxonomy. Over many years, Jefferson had sent him numerous ancient specimens unearthed in North America, and these became the basis of the vast collection soon to be housed within the French Natural History Museum. Cuvier's classification system was therefore unique, for it encompassed both fossils and living animals. "What do you make of Captain Clark's artifacts?" the so-called Ellis Alexander then asked of the bishop, feigning polite dinner conversation. "Are these magnificent beasts really extinct?" she continued. Or are they currently living and just undiscovered, hidden somewhere in the far west? Are there still roaming herds of mastodons alive today, do you think? Madison smiled at this thrust, understanding her intent. What you are really asking, he retorted, is, do I consider the Earth older than biblically believed? And also, why would any animal created by the Almighty be permitted to die out? Leaning forward, he then added, simply put, is the Bible infallible or mere metaphor? And is this whole idea truly nothing but blasphemy? Now the red-headed woman smiled. Yes, she replied. Don't answer that, Jamie, screamed the president, holding up his hand. Not yet, at any rate. I still need more claret first. Anyone else? He asked, laughing while reaching for the nearby bottle. Having eaten his pasta, Jefferson was finished with dinner, and in truth, never consumed much at any given meal. As the others were still dining, they each politely declined. I do believe your science has value, the bishop continued, unfazed by the outburst, which was a common enough occurrence from his old friend. Yet I also believe the scriptures to be true, given the proper context is employed. And as to why the Almighty does what he does, well, I'll just take that on faith and leave such weighty decisions as these up to him. Hear, hear, said the male impostor, who currently was only posing as the messenger Ward Patrick. After all, the two disciplines are totally different in both character and intent. I see no inherent conflict between them whatsoever. Religion and science, you mean? Inquired Jefferson. Yes, Mr. President, answered the time traveler. All other standardized disciplines, including theology, seek only the truth. Science, of course, does not. The striking comment stunned the two Virginians. They looked to each other, as if to confirm that both of them had indeed heard the same incredulous statement. They had. Science does not seek the truth? Asked Jefferson, perplexed. I thought science stood for that very purpose, to redefine what's true. Am I in error by holding such a stance? I'm afraid so, answered the redhead. If you believe as Ward does, or Mr. Priestley, his mentor. Yet currently, the parameters of science as an established method are still in debate. Not everyone accepts the interpretation they embrace. I'm quite lost, declared Madison. How can science not seek truth? Is this not its function, to rectify previous errors and so demonstrate the correct state of affairs? Ward put down his knife and fork. He then slowly wiped his mouth with his napkin. Next, he placed it beside his plate, signifying his meal was also completed. It's simply a matter of establishing definition, gentlemen, he stated. Science is only a tool, as are all disciplines, and every discipline such as history or the law employs a set of jargon, the specialized language used therein. Yet this fixed terminology must first be universally accepted in order to avoid utter confusion. Theology employs much jargon. Is this not so? Asked Ellis of the bishop. A gospel is not an epistle, nor is the Old Testament the canon. These provisos are agreed upon by all theologians and other experts in the field, are they not? Yes, that's correct, he granted, not sure where she was going. So it is with science, or rather it shall be, offered Ward. As my companion has so eloquently related, it's still being discussed, but the outcome is clear, at least in my humble estimation. Science will become the only discipline not concerned with truth, and this standard will grant the method a greater power to discern reality. Now I'm lost, said Jefferson, again laughing as he stood. He began to circle the table, refilling his guests' claret glasses, this time without asking their preference. No doubt the president was enjoying the evening thus far. Science, explained the woman, is based on fact. not truth.
But that's preposterous, boldly argued the bishop. The two terms are quite interchangeable, and by definition mean the same thing. Facts are certainly true.
By your elucidation, yes, she conceded. But such a stance denies science, as an established discipline, the use of its own jargon. Facts are scientifically distinguished from truth, which is ephemeral, and therefore always open to debate.
How so? Inquired Madison.
One's truth may not be another's, she answered. Hence, by its very nature, the concept cannot be universally defined.
For instance, within the law, suggested Ward, the truth is very much in doubt. The prosecution declares a man guilty while the defense proclaims his innocence. Legally, it's then up to the jury to define what's true and what's not.
Yes, cried the president, who by now had resumed his seat. I take your meaning, sir. In such a case, the definition is indeed fluid and would rely solely on the argument's merit. That and the advocate's presentation, of course. It's the same thing with history or theology, added the woman. You cannot simply state, to use another example, that Christ was the last name of Jesus, or that King George could not read. Without proper protocol, such a stance would have no credit. That is, it wouldn't be credible by any rule set by the discipline.
Yes, it would be incredible, again agreed the bishop.
Look at it this way, Ward said. Any clear morning at dawn, you can see with your own eyes that the sun rises, always climbing, and then, past noon, it will fall once more toward the horizon. This is an undisputed fact, a direct observation. Yet, does it mean it's true that the sun actually moves about the earth?
Well, stated Madison, it's true that everyone used to think along this line. That's accurate enough.
But now we know differently, continued the woman. Yet, will the fact that the sun does not change its position negate what you saw? Does it become less of a fact?
No, I suppose not,
the bishop conceded. No, she agreed, trying to make the connection. What it means is that you don't have all the facts.
The difference, added her confederate, is that facts are demonstrable things, while what is true is only someone's point of view. Interjecting truth into the equation simply clouds the issue, and always will. Just ask Galileo.
He's got you there, Jamie, chuckled Jefferson. The bishop only grunted in response, but at last he made the connection, and he saw the larger point involved. The official imposition of truth may have been a fine thing in the past, for it had held civilization together. But this rigid stance undeniably stifled forward progress. That fact couldn't be denied.
So, next wondered the president, using your interpretation, are you saying that no scientist can believe his ideas to be true?
They would be factual, answered the woman, not true per se. Any principled scientist who states, my theory is true, is really saying that it's true to the facts. Truth as an ideal must always fall within the field of philosophy, not science.
As I said before, related Ward, the two disciplines are quite different in nature, or rather, they should be, and it's my hope that this enlightened view wins out. A position held by your mentor also, stated Jefferson, referring to the late Joseph Priestley. The brilliant Englishman, a Towered man of letters, literally had been shipped out of his native country for nothing more than his astounding ideas. At the time, Jefferson was President Washington's Secretary of State, and he had immediately instigated a long and warm correspondence with the exile, covering an eclectic agenda of subjects. Yet, at the mention of the immigrant, the prelate grunted again. Priestley, aside from his vast scientific and philosophical writings, had been quite the effective and well-known dissenting churchman. He'd virtually invented Unitarianism, and he alone had first introduced the new denomination into the country. Yes, agreed the tall time traveler, ignoring Madison's reaction. Priestley greatly advanced the establishment of science as a factual discipline. His new style of notation for chemical elements has done much for standardizing that field.
Use of this new jargon, noted the redhead, permitted him,
enabled him even to identify previously unknown components in the very air we breathe, such as oxygen. And many people greatly enjoy the tasty soda water he concocted, a tangible example of something produced by this now-set method. His early work in the field of electricity, also granted by virtue of the same scientific process, rivals that of Mr. Franklin himself. His bold ideas on teaching and education in general, added Jefferson, are most insightful as well. I know this firsthand, for we exchanged many letters over the years in regards to Virginia's new university. He was quite astute. The bishop now grunted for a third time, but leaning forward, he then sternly decreed, "I know where you're going with this line, Tommy, and I won't be moved." After the comment, Jefferson's demeanor instantly changed, for he correctly read the intended meaning behind the statement. Unbeknownst to him, the time travelers also understood. The issue was the structure and purpose of the new university, and the president never made light of that subject. The Virginians had a stiff divergence of outlook regarding the proposed state institution. Also, as both were members of the Board of Visitors, the official committee charged with the details involved, this long-standing but deeply held difference of opinion had continually derailed any finalized plans for the new entity. As a consequence, the university's future was currently in limbo. Jefferson wished for a school without formal religious affiliation, something he distrusted as a matter of course. The bishop naturally disagreed, and he objected most strenuously to the stance of his oldest friend. The pair were at an impasse. The president's dream was to provide his state a public university, unlike those heretofore, free from theological dogma of any kind. Dedicated not to God Almighty, but to knowledge itself, this novel institution would embrace such diverse arts as architecture and applied engineering, or various branches of philosophy, including political science, astronomy, botany, the new zoology, and of course, the law. This innovative view was an astonishing posture given the times, for as other establishments of higher learning were primarily training grounds for the ministry, additional courses offered at these schools were only axillary to this chief purpose. Jefferson, as always, sought something quite different. He wanted another approach altogether, with a bold statement of intent that was currently untested. He desired for his beloved state a university totally devoid of contemplations of divinity, one that would match the courageous audacity of the new, uniquely formed nation. Madison thought such a posture would ensure nothing but a negative, second-class reputation, something unworthy of Virginia. Yet, he was no religious fanatic, and for all his vibrato, he did believe that personal dogma should have no sway in terms of politics. Seeing its value, he fully embraced the separation of church and state, but, being a man of unbending principle, he only wished for what was best in the long term, and he could not bring himself to agree with Jefferson's stated preference. "We're both on the university's planning committee," the president then told the visitors, by way of explanation. "There are still many contingencies left to consider, I'm afraid. And it's true we view certain inherent problems differently." Of course, the time travelers knew the situation. They had researched the bishop's oft-stated position well. It was their official mission to change his mind. "I understand, Mr. Jefferson," next asked Miss Alexander, thereby breaking the awkward silence following the last declaration, "that you've already designed numerous buildings for the projected university. Is that not so?" "Oh, yes," he responded, suddenly animated. He adjusted himself, sitting forward in his chair, saying, "I've completed for several, and have sketches of many more. They're in my office," he added. "Would you care to view them?" "Don't expect a proposal for any chapel," opined Madison. "No," countered Jefferson, "but the library drawings are finally completed, and that structure, not a church, will be the focal point for students and instructors alike." Once more the good bishop grunted, but Jefferson didn't relent. "I have but 1 year left in my term, Jamie," he said. "Then it's Monticello for me. and the university will be my first and foremost concern. You must yield and concede that another religious school is unneeded. That's the whole point." "Such an arrangement would be unprecedented," declared Madison. "It's not acceptable by any standard. The discipline of science may be a grand tool, but it's only one of many. And you must also teach religion and accept God's sanction." Jefferson sighed and sat back in his chair, again resigned to the stagnant status quo. Still, knowing Madison's good intentions, he felt no malice towards his dear old friend. After all, the brick-and-mortar work of the university remained years in the future, and the two of them would surely live to debate another day. Yet the president found himself unable to let the moment pass. "I take it, young man," he presumed, "you agree with your mentor that such a scientific approach is the best possible avenue for the advancement of education." The time traveler only nodded, unwilling to upset the poor bishop further. However, his red-headed colleague now sensed that they were close to achieving their goal, and wished him to push further. With a look, she told him so. "Such a standardized protocol, Mr. Jefferson," he therefore added, "works flawlessly in both practice and theory. Indeed, the great English experimentalist Sir Henry Cavendish effectively exploits the discipline for each of these differing purposes. He investigates with precision the discernible, very provable properties of physical objects, but also employs the exact principles to theorize the never provable, thereby enabling him, among other things, to surmise the total weight of the earth itself." "What?" barked the bishop, unbelieving this strange statement. "Why would he do that? What function could it possibly serve? Such information is meaningless." "Precisely," proclaimed Ward. "That's the whole idea, sir. Understand, it's the set method that's important, independent of its use. Every pure science, such as mathematics, demonstrates this principle, for it is, in itself, also totally meaningless." "Now hold on," said Jefferson. "I use math often. It certainly has meaning. That's its function." "Yes, but only when the discipline is applied to something tangible," the woman pointed out. "After all, the process is the same, regardless. For example, what's 1 plus 1? The president raised his eyebrows at this simplistic inquiry. The bishop leaned forward, awaiting his answer. Neither of them understood her intended thrust. 2, of course, Jefferson answered. "Yes," the young woman concurred, but then she quickly wondered. "But 2 what, exactly?" "Why, 2 anything," Madison replied. "Yes," she said again. "Or 2 nothings, just as well. 1 plus 1 will always equal 2. It's a given. The application doesn't matter for useful or not. Either way, it's a fact." "Science is only a tool, as I've noted," Ward added. "Yet the method, rigid but surprisingly simple, permits boundless opportunities. It just needs to be used." After this, no one spoke. The implication was clear enough. Education achieved without imposed truth stood apart and was a check against blind assumption. "Thus," at last reasoned the bishop, "under such a standard stratagem, the inherent flaws of history would not be repeated, and knowledge gleaned by it would be built from the bottom up, so to speak, no longer dictated from above." "Yes, that is the beauty, the elegance of the method," the redhead concurred. "The inherent advantages are self-evident. Results would then be limited only by application." "Jamie, that's precisely the point I've been trying to make," said Jefferson, almost pleading. "Furthermore, I don't reject the Almighty, nor need the students. They should embrace Him in a church, that's all, not in Virginia's new university." "Render unto Caesar, as it were," observed Madison, still ruminating. He began to tap his long fingers on the table, the tips dancing up and down in rapid succession. From long experience, Jefferson deduced this action as a positive sign. At last, The bishop stood and crossed to his oldest friend. "I'm afraid that I cannot agree," he stated, looking most glum. Then he indicated the bottle resting before the president. "At least," he added, "without more claret." Jefferson's eyes filled with tears, but quickly composing himself, this passed. He then also stood, facing his dearest companion since childhood. They embraced. A new toast was then proposed. Later, the time travelers were sitting in the buckboard, once more clomping over the cobblestones. Would he not have convinced him on his own? She asked. Perhaps, the tall man answered her. Yet now the precedent will be firmly set. This example will become the norm, begetting perpetual changes to the future. She only nodded, knowing it was so. You were superb, he informed her. Quite lucid, yet firm. Still, as a matter of course, we need to evaluate the mission in detail. Again she nodded, once more knowing it was so. Back at the mansion, the two Virginians were still marveling over the newly arrived specimens, but at last they had successfully corroborated the inventory. It was late, but neither was fatigued by the effort. Quite the contrary. Do you continue to edit your own Bible? Jamie wondered. Still working away, snipping out the parts with which you disagree? Is there any Old Testament left? Tommy laughed aloud, for this was a true evaluation. His project was long-term, and he'd never give it up. Also, the Older Testament was indeed the most heavily altered. Don't worry, the president tried to reassure him. I'm being very scientific in my scrutiny, so naturally, once completed, this new version will prove quite meaningless. Thank God for that, rejoiced the bishop. His companion easily concurred with this sentiment. Now he had only one regret. The remarkable red-headed woman had failed to view any of his wonderful renderings. Yet, unknown to him, she had a copy of each one on file. Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, and patrons here at Untold Tales, and we hope you love the stories that we're bringing to you month after month on the first of each month. Please consider leaving us a review on Podchaser. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful day.